Hello and welcome to Mendoza Reacts to PMQs, where every week I cut through the nonsense of Prime Minister's question time so you don't have to. Let's have at it.
Prime Minister, how does an area which goes into Tier 3 restrictions get out of those restrictions?
Donate money to the Conservative Party.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the simplest and most effective way for areas to get out of those restrictions is, of course, to get the R down to 1 or below, and I'm very pleased to say that some areas are already having a considerable effect with the measures that they're taking.
Which ones? Because that's not true.
Mr. Speaker, can I press the Prime Minister on that answer? If the infection rate R in a Tier 3 area has not come below 1, will it be possible in any circumstances for that area to come out of Tier 3 if the R hasn't come below 1?
Good question, because the answer should be no.
Mr. Speaker, obviously the R is one of the measures that we look at, and we'll take a decision based on a number of things, including the R, but also, of course, rates of infection, rates of admission to hospital, and other data. But the most important thing is for areas that do go into Tier 3, and I'm very grateful to local leadership in the areas that have gone into Tier 3, because it's the right thing for them to do, the right thing for their constituents, the right thing to save lives. When they are able to make progress, and of course they will come out of Tier 3. And as he knows full well, the measures that are put in place are reviewed every 28 days.
Yeah, but just because it's reviewed doesn't mean it's going to change.
Mr. Speaker, I'm now confused by the Prime Minister's answer. If it's not the R rate under 1, what is it? Because millions of people want to know the answer to that question, because millions of them are in Tier 3 and millions more are likely to go into Tier 3. They really need to know. And Prime Minister, on Friday, the Chief Scientific Officer said Tier 3 on its own certainly isn't enough to get the R rate below 1. On the same day, the Prime Minister himself said there was only a chance of getting infection rates down. This goes to the heart of the issue in Greater Manchester and elsewhere, because the widespread fear, Prime Minister, is that Tier 3 is the worst of all worlds. Yeah. It brings significant economic harm without getting the virus sufficiently under control to exit Tier 3. So instead of being a solution, Tier 3 is a gateway to weeks and weeks, more likely months and months of agony, from which there's no likely exit. Can the Prime Minister not see the problem if there isn't a clear exit?
Okay.
Sorry.
Pause. So this is so frustrating, because this has been an issue throughout this process, where the government's response, and when I say the government, I mean the Westminster government of Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings, they don't have it. This should be clear metrics that dictate when a local area can leave Tier 3 lockdown. There should be no confusion, there should be no ambiguity, everyone should know, and that information should be publicly accessible. It should not be a mystery as to why one area is able to emerge from Tier 3 and why one area can't. We're in the middle of a public health crisis. The most important thing in making sure that we all comply with the rules is that the rules are clear, and that we know that if we follow them, what metrics we can follow to know when we won't have to be following those rules anymore. And I think the reason that Boris Johnson isn't able to provide a response is because they don't have one. This whole thing has just devolved into cronyism, whereby if you happen to be a Tory-led constituency, then you're probably going to get some reprieves, some extra cash, lots of support. And if you're not, you're not. It's playing politics at the worst possible moment that they could be playing it. You know, and Boris Johnson is there saying there are multiple areas in Tier 3 that are making improvements. That's just a flat out lie. In fact, just watch this short video. This is the Deputy Chief Medical Officer. These are the comments that Keir Starmer is referring to, who has admitted already publicly that infections are up, R rates are up, Tier 3 isn't working.
Now again, I'm referring back to the heat maps that I showed you on the 12th of October,
showing that gradual warming up of disease rates in the 16 to 29s that then creeps through into the older age groups with a few weeks lag as we move through the age bands as we go up each of the blocks. That's the visual snapshot from the 12th of October. I'll now move to the new snapshot. And I think it's pretty stark. I think you can see very clearly now from these data that are just a week on how those heat maps have increased very markedly, not just in the northeast, not just in the northwest, but also in the East Midlands, top left, and in Yorkshire and Humber, bottom right. This is most concerning because it's the penetration of disease into the older age groups that gives the NHS significant problems.
If you're not already following the work of Independent Sage, please do. Independent Sage, spelt like the herb, S for Sierra, A for Alpha, G for Golf, E for Echo. They're on YouTube. Many of the most prominent scientists in the United Kingdom that were frustrated with the government's refusal to really share the process that their SAGE, their scientific group, was going through. So this group meets regularly. They hold a press conference every Friday that you can watch live on YouTube. You can ask questions in the chat section and you will get answers. I've seen people as young as 8 actually get their questions answered on this thing, so it's really accessible as well. And Anthony Costello is a member of Independent Sage. He's also the former director of the World Health Organization, and here's what he has to say. So in the press conference, Professor Van Tam admitted that circuit breakers work less well as cases rise, and that cases are rising in every region. So there is no region where cases are down. That was not true. Anthony continues. That's why Sage argued for a short 2-week circuit breaker a month ago. He also supported the Prime Minister arguing for both central and local contact tracing, yet the evidence shows local contact tracing is working at levels above 95% and call centre tracing at 55%, which is dismal. Investing in local systems is far more effective. Deloitte's test results within 24 hours is down to 25%. This is hopeless. Again, investment in the 44 NHS molecular virology labs, which are linked to local GP-NHS systems, would be far more effective than the private lighthouse labs. Deloitte's are also providing competitive private testing, which is direct conflict of interest with their public sector work, incentivising them to screw up their government contract. Yet there is no sign the government pays any notice of the evidence that their test, trace and isolate programme is among the worst in Europe and completely ineffective. So we face the relentless spread of cases in every region, the prospect of an ineffective circuit breaker that will need a much longer national lockdown to regain control, a useless, unreformed FTTI system, that's the test, trace and isolate system, which offers no protection, and a government ignoring science, public health and GPs. That's where we are. That's reality outside of Boris Johnson's bubble. Currently, the government is not doing the circuit breaker lockdown. It is not only not improving the test, trace and isolate system, but making it worse. The results are getting worse on a weekly basis. And their systems of tier 3, tier 2, these lockdowns are doing nothing to abate the increase in the R rate, in deaths, in hospitalisations and other metrics. And it's damaging the economy. So when Keir Starmer says it's the worst of both worlds, that's what he means. We are still, it is not dealing with the public health crisis, and it is exacerbating the resulting economic crisis. That's where we are.
Speaker, I've made it absolutely clear that part of the country going into tier 3 is only in there for 28 days. We will review it after 28 days, and areas that...
But nothing will have changed. except more people will be infected.
Have gone into tier 3, I believe are already making progress, and areas where there are restrictions in place are also showing signs of progress. We are pursuing, Mr. Speaker, a local, a regional approach, which is the sensible approach for this country. That's what the
You've freaking adopted an apocalyptic approach is what you've done, mate.
Supported last night. And again, I want to thank a local leadership in Merseyside, in Lancashire, actually in London and West Midlands and elsewhere for what they are doing.
No words for Andy Burnham then.
Of the right honourable gentleman opposite to attack local lockdowns when he wants to plunge the whole country, back into a damaging lockdown for weeks on end, and he has no clue about how he would propose to get the country out of that, does he?
Yes, Starmer.
Pause. But he knows exactly how to get the country out of that, just as independent Sage know how to get the country out of that. And so does most of the scientists that are arguing for a circuit breaker lockdown. It's Boris Johnson who actually doesn't have a way out. There is no way out of tier 3 lockdown. The cases are still rising. So in 28 days, what's he going to say? Cases are now 25% worse than they were before we went in, so we're going to ease tier 3. Obviously not. There's going to be more lockdowns at that stage, and probably at some point he's going to have to do a national lockdown, and it is going to have to be for significantly longer than 2 to 3 weeks. Or they're simply deploying a strategy of genocide. They are literally saying, do you know what, let's just let this thing go through, take out whoever it takes out, and tough. Which is not the behaviour of a civilised country. You might back that approach if you're watching this, but I'm telling you, if you do, you're backing a genocide. You are backing the willful killing of possibly hundreds of thousands of people rather than make necessary adjustments to the way that we manage our economy in order to save lives. So there is no way out of tier 3 without either backtracking, U-turning and going into national lockdown anyway, or simply allowing people to die, or staying in tier 3 forever, in which case, as Keir says, worst of both worlds, because lots of people are going to die and the economy is going to be trashed. So the gaslighter-in-chief is fully in operation today.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate there's going to be a review every 28 days, but if the R rate hasn't come below 1, then the infection rate is still going up, and the numbers are going up, and the admissions are going up, and the numbers in hospital are going up, and the deaths are going up. Is the Prime Minister seriously saying that he would take a tier 3 area out of tier 3 with the R above 1? I don't think so.
No.
Let me spell out what this means. Let me spell out what this means. On Friday, thousands of people in Greater Manchester, taxi drivers, pub and hospitality workers, people working in betting shops, the self-employed and freelancers, will either be out of work or face significant pay cuts. That's the reality on Friday in Greater Manchester. But their rent and their mortgage won't be lower, their food and their heating bills won't be lower, and that could last for months. Why can't the Prime Minister and the Chancellor understand this? Stop bargaining with people's lives, stop dividing communities, and provide the support that's needed in Manchester.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud that this government has already given Greater Manchester £1.1 billion in support for business, £200 million in extra unring-fenced funding, £50 million to tackle infections in care homes, £20 million for tests and trace, another £22 million for local response that we announced yesterday. And yesterday, the Mayor of Greater Manchester was offered a further £60 million, which he turned down, Mr. Speaker, with no encouragement, I may say, to support from the right honourable gentleman. So what I can tell the House today, Mr. Speaker, is that that cash will be distributed to the boroughs of Greater Manchester. And I want to thank my honourable and right honourable colleagues across the House for Haywood and Middleton, from Bolton North West, from Bolton North East, from Bury South.
You're such a jerk.
Lee, Orchardsham and Sale West and Hazel Grove for the support that they have given in this matter, Mr. Speaker.
Liar. If you've probably seen all the stuff with Andy Burnham this week, the Mayor of Greater Manchester. Andy Burnham found out live on television this week that the government was not going to give Manchester a penny in additional financial support despite forcing them to go into Tier 3 lockdown. No additional financial support for the millions of people who are going to face either losing their jobs or a serious cut in their salaries at a time when, you know, things are already tough. And it's all well and good Boris Johnson standing up there and saying, oh yeah, well, you know, they're going to have, you know, X 80% of their current wage. Yeah, but they've got 100% of their financial obligations. You know, and it's funny because they can always find the money to throw. So they found £12 billion to throw at a private company, Serco. They were paying, you know, private consultants upwards of £7,000 a day for a botched test, trace and isolate system. And yet they couldn't give 65 million, just a tiny fraction of that money, to the millions of people in Manchester. I mean, this financial deal that Boris Johnson has put together for Manchester equates to £8 per head. £8 per head for telling a group of people that they cannot work, for telling businesses that they cannot open and operate, and they're giving them £8 per head.
This is a Prime Minister that can pay £7,000 a day for consultants on track and trace, which isn't working, that can find £43 million for a garden bridge that was never built, but he can't find £5 million for the people of Greater Manchester. I really think the Prime Minister's crossed a Rubicon here, not just with the miserly way that he's treated Greater Manchester, but the grub it, take it or leave it way these local deals are being done.
Absolutely.
It's corrosive to public trust, to pit region against region, mayor against mayor, council against council, asking them to trade away their businesses and jobs. We need a one-nation approach. Replace these endless local battles with clear national criteria and proper support for jobs. Labour's motion this afternoon would do that. Why won't the Prime Minister support it?
See, how can you argue against that? I literally don't understand the mindset of someone who would argue against that.
To the entire country, £200 billion in support for jobs and livelihoods across the whole of the country already, a further £9.9 billion now for the job support scheme. It is this government that has cut VAT for business, deferred business rates. There is no other country in Europe, Mr. Speaker, where so much support, so much help has been given to the population to get through this crisis.
That's a lie.
And we will continue to do that. But I think it is the height of absurdity, Mr. Speaker, that he stands up and attacks the economic consequences of the measures that we're obliged to take across some parts of the country when he wants to turn the lights out with a full national lockdown, taking kids... that was his policy last week anyway, wasn't it? Perhaps he could confirm that's still his policy. Is that what he wants to do?
I mean, it's just nonsense. It's word salad.
Here's Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, at his press conference yesterday, the Prime Minister produced heat maps across the country showing the infection rate up in all ages across all regions, and particularly showing regions that have been in the equivalent of Tier 2 restrictions for weeks, if not months, moving into Tier 3. Now, if they're moving into Tier 3, Tier 2 hasn't worked.
Yeah.
Because if Tier 2 worked, they should be going to Tier 1. So
Yep.
Tier 2 goes to Tier 3. Tier 3 has no end because there's no prospect or confidence in the R rate coming below 1. And I do not believe that a Tier 3 region will come out of those restrictions unless R is below 1 and whilst numbers are still going up. So we now have a stark choice. And by the way, Prime Minister, Cornwall is the only place, possibly with the Isle of Wight, where the infection rate today is less than Greater Manchester when it went into local restrictions. So this idea that some areas are immune is wrong. So there's a stark choice. Carry on with the Prime Minister's approach, which will lead to weeks and weeks and months of prolonged agony in all your constituencies for millions of people in Tier 2 and 3 with no exit, or put in place a 2 to 3 week time-limited circuit break to break the cycle and bring the virus back under control. Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland in part have chosen that path. With half-term starting this Friday, this may be the last opportunity for the Prime Minister to put in place an effective circuit break. The Prime Minister was too slow in the first phase of this pandemic. He's being too slow again. We cannot repeat this mistake. Will he act in the public interest and take the opportunity to put in place a circuit break this Friday?
You know, the more I watch this, the more I'm starting to become so cynical. I would not put it past this government to be deliberately drawing out the Tier 3 process to mask the effects of Brexit in January. That is going to put enormous pressure on an economy which is already under enormous pressure. And there is a part of me that thinks it would be far more convenient for this government if those outcomes were seen as the unavoidable result of a coronavirus pandemic than political, well, corruption, really. And I think it awaits to be seen, because there literally is no rational basis for the Tier 3 lockdowns that are already shown to not be working. So I fear there is, again, just more dark politics happening here rather than good government play.
Speaker, we will do whatever it takes to get this country through the crisis, with or without the support of the right honourable gentleman opposite. And I may say that I think that his policy, I've explained why I don't believe that his policy is the right one for the country, because it would involve closing schools, it would involve shuttering businesses, with all the psychological, the emotional damage that lockdown of that kind brings. He can't say how many...
Okay, pause. I've got to stop him, because I cannot hear another Tory give me the mental health defence against lockdown. Because there are many of us who have spent every week since the Tories came to power in 2010 fighting their cuts to mental health services. And they didn't give two shits about people's mental health during any of that. And let's just take a look at the figures, because it is staggering. This is not just a small cut. These budgets have been savaged. So mental health trusts in England have seen their budgets fall by more than 8% in real terms over the course of this Parliament, figures suggest. The reduction, worth almost £600 million, was revealed through research by the BBC News and online journal Community Care. At the same time, referrals to community health teams, which help people avoid being admitted to hospital, have risen nearly 20%. Between 2010 and 2016, mental health budgets were cut by 8%, while the demands on them rose 20%. You know, what do you think the impact of that was? And it's those services, those cut services, that are now having to scramble to deal with the consequences on mental health of everything that is happening at the moment. It's not just lockdown, it's people facing financial ruin, being unable to feed their kids. This is going to place an unsustainable strain on someone's mental health in at least equal measure to a lockdown. But the fact is, if they did give a shit about mental health, they'd be funding it properly, but they're not.
Circuit breakers he thinks would be necessary. He can't say how long they would go on. He can't say how much damage they would do to the UK economy and to people's mental health, Mr. Speaker. We, on the other hand, want to go on with our commonsensical approach, which is a local and a regional approach, keeping kids in school, keeping our economy moving, because that is the way to get the whole of our country through this crisis together, so that we all, and particularly those regions that are now, alas, under Tier 3 restrictions, all the regions of the country bounce back strongly together, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah. We're now heading to the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford, audio only. Ian Blackford.
Yay!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my thoughts are very much with the member for Bolton South East. I hope she makes a speedy recovery. Mr. Speaker, next week, just as the pandemic is worsening, the Tory government will scrap the furlough scheme in a move that will cause a wave of mass redundancies across the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the Prime Minister is complaining that he can't get by on his £150,000 salary. So can I ask the Prime Minister, if he's finding life such a struggle, How on earth does he expect many workers to get by on just £5.84 an hour when the Tory cuts to furlough sink in?
Right?
Mr. Speaker, actually, I'm proud of what we've done to support people on low incomes throughout this period, and indeed before. It was this government that raised the living wage by record amounts. We've just increased universal credit by about £1,000 a year, and he makes the point about furlough, Mr. Speaker, and as he knows, combine the universal credit with job support, the job support scheme that we've just announced, and workers will be getting 80% of their existing salary. We will get this country through this crisis, and we will continue to support people of low incomes throughout the period.
Turning to Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid the Prime Minister just simply doesn't get it. Yesterday we saw his total disregard for the people of Greater Manchester, a Tory attitude that people in Scotland are all too familiar with. Millions of families are struggling to get by, and this Tory government wants to cut their incomes in the middle of a pandemic. It is clear that the Prime Minister has made a deliberate decision to let unemployment soar, just like Thatcher did in the 1980s. Time is running out. With 1 week left, will the Prime Minister finally U-turn on his cuts to the furlough scheme and invest in our communities, or will he leave millions of people on the scrap heap?
Mr. Speaker, I really must reject what the right honourable gentleman has just said, because it bears no relation to the facts or the reality of what this government is doing to support people across the country. And it's not just the £200 billion investment in jobs and livelihoods. What we also are engaged in, and what we will continue to deliver, is a colossal investment in education, in health,
Shut up,
in housing.
Pauls. This is just boosterism. This is all nonsense. Everyone, these figures are all publicly available. We can see exactly what's happening in these budgets, and the idea that there's record-breaking investment going into our public services at the moment is just, it would actually be funny if it wasn't so tragic and if the consequences weren't so stark. Because every time you watch this guy talk, it's like Upside Down Day. Everything he says, you can basically guarantee the opposite is true. And people are going to find out for themselves really soon. The furlough scheme ends in a little over a week. At that point, there's just under 1 million people dependent on that scheme right now. And the chances are those people are going to lose their jobs, or they're going to be working as hard as they always have for less money. Their rent isn't going down, their mortgage payments aren't going down, food prices are going up. There really is going to be quite extraordinary economic crisis moving forward, and it doesn't feel like the government is even remotely interested in actually dealing with it. They seem far more interested in funneling as much public money as possible to themselves and their mates in order to retain power and shore up existing inequalities. So yeah, what a brutal edition of Prime Minister's Question Time. Really bleak this week. I mean, but as bleak as it is this week, it's going to be more bleak next week and more bleak the week after if this government doesn't start taking substantial U-turns. But again, they're going to be too late. By the time they do eventually U-turn, which they will eventually be forced to do on a lot of these issues, just given public outcry, by that point, damage that didn't need to happen will already be done. And that is a responsibility that these people will have to live with for the rest of their lives. Not that it means much to them. So thank you for tuning in to this week's bleak as hell Mendoza Reacts to PMQs. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you next week. Until then, bye-bye.